where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where the words come out from the depth of truth, where the tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habits, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom. My Father, let my country awake. These are the words of the great poet Rabindranath Tagore, who had the experiential knowledge of the indwelling self and the experiential bliss of living in freedom. Freedom is one of the most cherished dreams of every human being. Our desire to be free from restrictions and limitations expresses itself everywhere. The human soul longs for freedom. Go home is the cry of a heart that feels suffocated in bondage. The joy of living in freedom is a human prerogative, but only few can really achieve it. Most of the time, we don't even understand the real concept of freedom. We don't understand what real freedom means and how it can be achieved. Freedom is not running away from world, from the mixed responsibilities of life. Liberation and absolute bliss can be ours wherever we are stationed in life and whatever the type of work we have assigned ourselves to do. Liberation is living in the awareness of the self, from moment to moment, and performing all our work in unity with the source of life. Freedom is living in the tissue of the present moment, where there is no lingering shadow of past and no illusion of future. Liberation is the acceptance of the self. Liberation is living in the essential nature of the soul with the experiential knowledge of our own immortality. Freedom is being awakened to our own completeness. It is the experience of being restored to the wholeness where the human soul resumes identity with the Supreme Soul as the co-creator of the universe. Absolute freedom, liberation, mukti, moksha or nirvana is right here in the middle of samsara. It is simply being aware of the essentiality of our real natural self. It is the recognition and perpetual experience of our true nature, which is pure, luminous, and unconditional. Freedom is to be in touch with the center of our being, the Sahaja Avastha, where we are not compelled by any desire, where we have no regrets, no expectation, no fear, and we can hold on to our essential nature, which is peaceful, pure, and absolute bliss. The psychological consciousness is conditional, the cause of bondage. The awareness of the pure consciousness is, in contrast, freedom. As we generally see in our lives that at every step, our own hidden impulses indicate that we are being slave of our own conditioned behavior. There are times we do feel suffocated in our present circumstances and the bondage we have created around us. There are times when we really want to make an escape. I have often heard people saying, "I want to jump out of my head." Most of us are weak and unable to get out of the unhappy situation. We feel trapped and helpless. But we don't look at the cause of slavery. And instead of looking into the cause for bondage, we keep knitting the web of helplessness around us. This is really so true that generally the mind is conditioned to remain involved in those ideas and objects to which it has been attached for some reason. It forms the habit of thinking about the same thing over and over again. If we watch our thoughts in silence, we will realize that the thoughts of today are the repetition from yesterday or somewhere in past. So at some point, really, we have to learn to become aware of our thoughts and actually come out of the self-created web. The key to freedom is to monitor the quality, quantity, and the direction of thoughts. By repeated guidance of mantra and the gradual practice of meditation, as the mind settles into the quietness of the self, it enjoys the silence and we are liberated from the shadows of our repeated conditioned behavior and the life becomes a blessing. It is indeed a fact that our bondage is mainly in our identification with ego that gives us the feeling of I and mine. Ego dilutes our vision and makes it very narrow and selfish. Ego cries for name and fame. For example, when everything goes our way and we achieve recognition, our ego expands. But if things don't move the way we want, we often blame others. Sometimes even God. In state of disappointment and frustration, our vision becomes very narrow and very selfish. An arrogant person generally lives enclosed in a miserable world of his own false values, ruled by I and mine. His bondage is definitely his own self-created web of false identification. He struggles constantly and tries to prove others that he is better, more educated, and wealthy. He brags a lot about his achievements and lives in a world of his own self-imagined importance. Since he expects and demands attention from others, he usually becomes deprived from the genuine love of others. He is generally very fearful, lonely, and lives in a miserable bondage. This is indeed so true that demanding to be noticed, loved, and respected is the wailing cry of a heart bound by false values. I like what the great educationist Paul Brunton used to say: in delusion of ego and in its unchecked selfishness is mankind's worst advisor. You know what? In order to overcome the pressure of ego, we can make some changes in our thought pattern with the help of mantra japa, with constant repetition of mantra. As our identification with God becomes natural and stronger, slowly our identification with ego starts fading. As soon as the iron curtain of ego is lifted, we enter into the world where I and mine is replaced by thou and thine. It is difficult but not impossible. It surely happens in due course of time There is no doubt about it. I really appreciate what John Blofield used to say. Complete negation of ego, conscious union with the source of being, is a task so hard to accomplish within one lifetime that not a moment may be wasted. Because if the opportunity is missed, who knows how many lives will elapse before the condition needed for further progress becomes available to us. He strongly believed in the spiritual momentum created by the constant repetition of mantra, which could bring significant changes in our thinking faculty. It is indeed so true when mantra connects our thoughts to the Supreme Soul, it automatically disconnects our thoughts from the old dispositions. So with constant mantra jap, when a person learns to live in harmony with the rhythms of the inner purity, he is awakened to the essentiality of his divine nature, and his identification with ego starts fading. The anchorage with the Supreme Self replaces erroneous egocentric ideas with relaxed, flawless thinking. The consciousness of the indwelling self becomes evidential to him, and he becomes very kind, humble, polite, and compassionate. He lives his life with an unflinching faith in God, faith in his own self, and enjoys the bliss of living in freedom. The same person who has enclosed himself in false values and was living in self-created bondage now feels free like a bird dancing in the air. The grace of the divine is an inherent treasure of every person. It is always within us and at our demand, whenever it is called out. And the mantra jap really does it. Another reason why people live in bondage is because of their expectations from others. For example, whenever somebody does a little favor to someone, he expects rewards, some words of thanks, here and there. This way, the person definitely restricts his happiness and lives upon the mercy of others. He depends upon other people's response for his personal satisfaction and happiness. I really like what Dale Carnegie has written in one of his books. He describes this true incident. Once he met a businessman in a party who was very angry and very upset with indignation. After sitting with him for about 15 minutes, the man told him about the reason why he was so angry and so upset. It was something with his employees which happened about 11 months ago, but he was still very upset and actually could not talk about anything else. He had given to his 34 employees about $10,000 as Christmas bonus, approximately $300 each, and no one ever thanked him. He complained bitterly. I feel so bad. Why did I give them anything? People are so thankless. They really don't deserve anything. Dale listened to everything very patiently, and then he told the businessman, well, maybe your employees thought they were underpaid and overworked throughout the year. Maybe they thought it was their yearly bonus, something they actually earned, and it was not a Christmas gift. Maybe because he was so critical and unapproachable, no one really dared or cared to thank him. Maybe they felt he gave the bonus because most of the profits were going to the taxes anyway. Maybe this or maybe that. The truth is that actually No one has any control on what other people think, what their responses are going to be in a particular situation. These thoughts of expectations are the ghosts which haunt people day and night. These feelings of pain and resentment have caused a lot of torture to mankind throughout the history. People live in self-torture and bondage. They make their lives miserable and also those who live with them. That's why Lord Krishna repeats again and again in Bhagavad Gita, Karmane vadhikaraste ma paleshu kadachana. Your right is to perform your work, not at all to its fruit. Although the gospel of working without expectation has been mentioned in almost all the ancient scriptures, but the process has not been explained clearly, especially for an ordinary person. Shri Krishna explains the process very clearly and very precisely in Bhagavad Gita. He explains that the discipline of doing work without expectation comes with the practice of living in the consciousness of the divine. The inner discipline and closeness with the source of life makes us receptive to the voice of God and initiates us into the performance of work in a co-partnership with God. The transcendental state of yogic unity is free from all types of conflicts, expectations, and anxieties of results. When a person becomes grounded in the consciousness of God with the help of mantra japa, he naturally becomes free from all desires of rewards, name, and fame. In that state of inner contentment, the attitude of giving and sharing becomes a second nature, and the person lives in freedom. For example, the saints and sages are always very caring, sharing, giving, kind, and generous. The reason is that knowingly or unknowingly, they are always settled in the deepest awareness of divine, which brings the purity of divine nature, thoughts, words, and deeds. When our thoughts, words, and actions are determined from enlightened consciousness, the inner light is definitely revealed in the activities of daily life. Anyone who constantly works in unity with the indwelling self, he lives in freedom and attains the blissful state of immortality in due course of time. There is no doubt about it. So, in order to experience the joy of freedom, we have to rise above all expectation and limitations of name, fame, and rewards. We have to rise above the false identifications and make our links with the Supreme Soul. When we start living in the awareness of God with the help of repeating mantra, slowly our desires for rewards, name, and fame fade away. Our identification with the self opens many more pleasant channels of communication with other people. We feel at ease within our own self. It helps and improves our dealings with others, and we naturally become very loving, caring, and forgiving. For example, why some people find it so hard to forget and forgive? Because they are not at ease within themselves. The harder they try to punish the other person, the more deeply they hurt themselves. As we notice in some families, the vindictiveness goes on for several generations. Another reason why people cannot forgive others is because they don't have the ability and strength to forgive, which comes from our permanent association with God. When the mind is peaceful and settled in the awareness of the soul, it is really easy to maintain emotional stability and to forgive others. The habit of living in the nature of the self definitely brings some remarkable changes in our personality and in our attitude. I have seen many incredible changes of this type in hundreds of people in my lifetime. Really, I have seen them so often that I don't wonder anymore. I really like these words from the poetry of Rabindranath Tagore. I sat alone in the corner of my house, thinking it too small for any stranger to come. But now, with thy grace, when the door is flung open, I feel there is room for the entire world. Forgiveness is a great gift of God. To forgive is to feel free, like a cloud wandering in the open sky. A forgiving soul is indeed a liberated soul. Similarly, trust and faith in other people also brings freedom in life. As we generally see that most of us are constantly haunted by the ghost of distrust and doubt. We don't trust other people because we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust ourselves because we are weak and we have lost faith in ourselves. Lack of faith in our own self is due to the lack of faith in God. We are constantly knitting a web of self-doubt, self-rejection, guilt and fear all around us, and ultimately we do feel trapped in our own self-created web. As we notice in our modern materialistic societies, the number of suicides is increasing every day. People feel suffocated and want to escape from their present circumstances. Most of these tragedies can be prevented if these people are guided into the right channels with the help of prayers and faith in God and faith in their own selves. I like what Dr. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, has written. During the past 30 years, people from all the civilized countries of the earth have consulted me. I have treated many hundreds of patients. Among all my patients in the second half of their life, that is to say, over 35, there has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. It is safe to say that every one of them fell ill because he had lost that which the living religion of every age have given to their followers. And none of them has been really healed who did not regain his religious outlook. Millions of people all over the world have experienced this truth, and I personally feel this statement to be very true. Faith in God is the key to happiness, peace, and liberation. From faith in God comes faith in our own selves, and from faith in our own selves comes the faith and trust in other people. With constant and devoted repetition of mantra, our most erroneous thoughts, emotional conflicts, and stressed ideas are replaced by relaxed, pure, productive, creative, and flawless thinking. The life that seemed stressed and boring at one point becomes a blessing to be used in service of humanity. The same person who was a problem for himself and for others becomes an embodiment of love, compassion, and generosity. The feeling of hate changes into love, loneliness into perfect harmony with others, and life becomes relaxed, peaceful, and harmonious. This life can be really enjoyable, pleasant, and worth living only if we could learn to live in the consciousness of God who resides in the hearts of all. Another cause of bondage is the identification of happiness with material things. At every step in our life, our conditioned habits indicate that we are being slave of our desires and worldly comforts. We feel pushed along helplessly by greed beyond our conscious control. There is a famous saying by an Indian saint, "Chaha chudi chandari, at नीचन की नीच, यूं तो पूर्ण ब्रह्म था जो चाहा न होती बीच." Every person is essentially divine, but because of his weakness for worldly desires and slavery to the conditioned inclination, he loses his conscious relationship with inner divinity and lives in fear and bondage. For example, it is true that all of us need some reasonable financial security, food and shelter to live. But when our simple needs of day-to-day life are stretched out of proportion, they become the cause of worry, anxiety, bondage, and slavery. I like this example given by Rabindranath Tagore about the bondage of the soul, who feels imprisoned and bound. "Prisoner, tell me, who was it that bound you? Prisoner, tell me, who was it that wrapped this unbreakable chain?" "It was I," said the prisoner, "who forged this chain very carefully. I thought my invincible power would hold the world captive, leaving me in freedom, undisturbed. So night and day I worked at the chain with huge fires and cruel hard strokes. When at last the work was done and the links were complete and unbreakable, I found that it held me in its grip." This is what happens to most of the people in the world. The desires of worldly enjoyments are indeed the cause of imprisonment, bondage, and slavery. People consider their luxuries to be their necessities, and that's why they become trapped. I like what Frank Capra says, "The second noble truth that deals with the cause of all suffering is Trishna, the clinging or grasping. It is the futile grasping of life based on a wrong point of view, which is called avidya or ignorance in Buddhist philosophy." Worldly desires are indeed the major cause of human unhappiness and bondage. It is the pursuit of false values which imprisons the human soul. It is the desire of accumulating more than others, it is the greed and envy that sets people against one another. I like what the great educationist E.F. Schumacher used to say: a life which is devoted primarily to the pursuit of material ends and to the neglect of the spiritual sets man against man and nation against nation. Man's needs are infinite, and infinitude can be achieved only in the spiritual realm, never in the material. Man assuredly needs to rise above the humdrum of the world. The inner wisdom shows him the way to do it. He further writes, "What is wisdom? Where it can be found? It can be read in numerous publications, but it can be found only inside our own self. To be able to find it, one has to first liberate himself from such masters as greed and envy." The stillness following liberation, even if momentary, produces such insights of wisdom which are obtainable in no other way. The test of universal love is indeed the absence of greed and jealousy. Anybody who is able to resist the urges arising from the material world, he becomes liberated even in his lifetime. According to Dr. Radhakrishna, moksha or liberation is in the lifetime, not something after death. It is an experience of the present, not a prophecy of the future. It is living in the Spirit of God, who is the foundation and power of life. When we become convinced about the presence of God in us with constant repetition of mantra, our identification of happiness with the material world starts vanishing. The inner emptiness is replaced by inner security and contentment. The flow of fulfillment that comes from our unity with the indwelling self brings peace and inner security. It gives satisfaction, contentment, fulfillment, and above everything else, freedom. I like these words of Rabindranath Tagore from Gitanjali. "By all means they try to hold me secure, those who love me in this world. But it is opposite with thy love, which is higher than theirs, and thou keepest me free." Anybody who develops a conscious connection with the essentiality of his pure and unconditioned nature, he definitely becomes very secure and lives in freedom. He becomes very contented, integrated, and peaceful. He is blessed with remarkable inner security, right intuition, and perception, which brings clarity of understanding and liberation in due course of time. The inner security, detachment, and liberation. This is a process of step-by-step progress towards self-realization, God realization, and liberation. This reminds me some very beautiful lines by a Chinese poet, Lao Tzu. "If you realize you have enough, you are truly rich. If you stay in the center of your being, you will endure forever." One time, I was interviewed by a reporter from the church. He asked me 3 questions. Number 1, what is God for you? Second question, what does God want from us? And the third question was, what responses people should make to God. In answer to the first question, I explained that the essence of life is God. I told him a story from Upanishads where Yagvalakya once asked a question to Janaka, "O king, what is the light by which a man lives?" The king answered, "It is the light of the sun by which a man lives." Yagvalakya asked again, "When there is no sunlight, what is the light by which a man lives?" The king answered, "It is the light of the moon." Yagvalakya said, "When there is no moonlight, then what is the light by which a man lives?" The king answered, "O sage, it is the fire by which a man lights the candle and performs its activities." Yagvalakya said, "There are some blind people who cannot see the candlelight. Can you tell me what is the light by which a man lives?" The king answered, "O sage, the sound. It is the sound which guides him to find his way and perform his activities." The sage further said, "O king, there are people, those are deaf and dumb. They have no concept of sound because they can't hear. So what is the light by which such a man lives?" To this the king answered, "O sage, it is the light of the self, which guides a man to live." It is indeed the light of the self, which is the essence of life and is the God in us. It is the light of the self which guides man in all respects. It illumines the inner world and the outer world. It is the light which energizes every little molecule in the universe and every little cell in our body. This light is the inner intelligence, the Supreme Lord residing in our body and everywhere around us. The same concept has been described in Bhagavad Geeta, chapter 13, verse 17. Jyotisha mapitajyotis tamsa parmujyate jnanam geyam jnangamya hridi sarvasya vishtatam. The Supreme Lord is the light of all lights and beyond darkness. He is knowledge, the object of knowledge, as well as the goal of knowledge. He is seated in the hearts of all. Now coming to the answer of second question, what does God want from us? God wants us to live in unity with Him. The Supreme Self, Paramatma, wants its fragment, Jivatma, to stay in touch with Him and work in a co-partnership with Him. Answer to the third question, what responses people should make to God? To that my answer was, we should offer all our work in service of God. This is what God wants from us. It is indeed the attitude of service to the Supreme Divinity which gives freedom in life. Performance of duty definitely becomes a means for psychological and spiritual growth and liberation when it is determined from the purity of the self and carried out as an offering to the divine. When we make ourselves a conscious instrument in carrying the work of God in society, we transform our work into a means for the highest spiritual perfection and freedom. We develop an identity with the Supreme Soul and with the community in which we live. The pure and sincere duty-oriented attitude of service uplifts us in all respect, and we live in absolute freedom in the middle of samsara. Those who are liberated in their lifetime their status is that of Jiva Mukta. In general, people are aware of only three states of consciousness: waking, dream, and deep sleep. Yet, there is another state of increased awareness known as Turiya. This is a specific state of pure, luminous consciousness when the individual soul goes in unity with the transcendental soul and really feels liberated. So, with the regular practice of mantra, when the mind starts identifying with the words of mantra and the supreme power enshrined in mantra, it becomes deconditioned and attains unity with the source of life in transcendence. This liberation of mind from the clutches of conditioned habits is the beginning of freedom. A Jiva Mukta definitely lives in the world like anybody else, but his activities are always centered in God. His appearance doesn't change, but Jivatma, who resides in the body, is slowly liberated from the false identification. Jivatma transcends all limitations and feels free with the repetition of mantra. The soul or Atma is pure, lucid, and self-illuminated. When the soul identifies itself with the body and the qualities of nature, then it is designated as Jivatma or the embodied soul. This nescience is the cause of bondage from birth to birth. Jivatma, the embodied soul, forgets its true nature, but with the help of constant mantra japa, calling upon the name of God, realization of the Supreme Soul beyond body and the masks of nature is again realized, and Jivatma transcends to its essential, unconditioned nature. From Jivatma, it becomes Mahatma and gradually Paramatma, a liberated soul. To live in this enlightened consciousness is indeed living in eternity and total bliss. A liberated soul looks at everything from a different perspective. He does not get puffed up at his own state of being illuminated, and also does not worry if he is not rewarded for his virtuous deeds. Since such a person always lives in unity with God, with the indwelling soul, he feels very secure, confident, and makes very quick and firm decisions. His dealings with other people come from the purity of his heart. His constant identity with the Supreme Soul gives him the strength to rise above the dualities of life. He regards pleasure and pain, loss and gain, honor and dishonor as passing phases of life. He looks at them as the appearance and disappearance of kaleidoscopic dispositions. He beholds the tragedies and the comedies of this ever-changing world with an attitude of unflinching happiness. He is always serene, peaceful, and free. This reminds me an incident from the life story of Sri Ramakrishna. Once Sri Ramakrishna, who was a chief priest at the Kali temple, Calcutta, made some mistakes during the Durga Puja. The managing committee of the temple decided to get rid of him. So one day in the morning, when Sri Ramakrishna was sitting with his disciple, one of the temple officials came to him and ordered him to leave at once. Without the least resentment, Sri Ramakrishna picked up his towel and walked unprotestingly out of the room which had been his home for last 26 years. He had almost reached the gate of the compound when people came running after him, crying, "Please stay, we beg you to stay." At this, Ramakrishna smiled, turned around, without saying a word, went back to his room, sat down, and continued the conversation with his devotees as if nothing unusual had happened. This is what we call gunatit sa uchyate, or the freedom of Jivatma in one's lifetime. Total absence of ego, perfect calmness, self-mastery, righteous actions characterize the lives of the liberated saints. After achieving this state of liberation, it is a matter of personal choice whether one takes an active interest in the world or totally renounces the world. For example, Rishi Yagvalakya renounced the world to live in the forest, whereas the king Janaka ruled his empire. Where to live and what to do is immaterial for the soul who has learned to live in the consciousness of the divine. All of his activities are centered around the Supreme Self, and all of his work is offered as a service to the divine. King Janaka lived as an embodiment of the divine. He has been called Videhi. This means that he always lived totally soaked in the nature of God. He looked upon his body just a frame and a vehicle to perform the worldly activities. To be liberated and emancipated is to rise above the dualities and conflicting emotions of life. It is to be free and integrated. The conditioned behavior which is irrelevant and inappropriate gets eliminated. A liberated person is happy, contented, and illuminated. He has the ability to peel away the unpleasant past, and he holds the courage to live with the situation at hand. Since he lives in harmony with his body, he knows how to listen to its silent moods and how to deal with each one of them. A liberated person is a good listener. His mind, inner self, and body work in unison. Everything he speaks comes from the depth of his heart. Truth, fearlessness, honesty, and sincerity radiates from him. A person who is settled in the integrity of the inner wisdom has the courage to take responsibility for his decisions. He never feels ashamed and hardly blames others for his failures. This is the meaning of living in freedom and liberation. The constant repetition of mantra brings a new direction to our lives and eventually freedom. It is through the constant repetition of mantra we are eventually introduced to the secret codes of our programmed life and the programmer. We come to the realization of our essential nature, which purifies the mind from the xeroxed behavior of many lives, and we are finally liberated from the clutches of our conditioned habits and the tricks and treats of Maya. It is being awakened to our enlightened awareness, being restored to the wholeness of the divine, free at last. This reminds me some beautiful lines written by a Sufi poet. दरिया की मौज से लहर उठी और उलट कर बहर से कहने लगी, मैं तुझसे हुई और तुझ में फना, तू और नहीं मैं और नहीं. Quiet mantra jap works at our subconscious level and gradually brings some dramatic changes in our day-to-day life. Slowly and gradually, with the constant repetition of mantra, a new person is born from the old one, the type of person we always wanted to be. As explained earlier, at the deepest levels of our awareness, we do become the co-creator of our own destiny and our own personality. Sometimes people expect these changes to occur overnight. I remember some people losing their faith in mantra out of frustration. As I said earlier, that each one of us is different from the others for the way we think and believe. So the effects of mantra also vary from one person to another. To some people, the transformation comes within few days. For others, it may take few months, and for some other people, it takes years, and for others, many lives. It all depends upon the receptiveness of the person. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, out of hundreds of aspirants practicing spiritual discipline, only few are enlightened and achieve freedom from worldly bondage. The reason is that only a few of us truly learn to love God, trust God, and learn to surrender in God with acceptance, willingness, and faith. The undisputed truth is that constant repetition of mantra definitely brings changes in our personality over a period of time. There is no doubt about it. In this respect, sages give a very good example. They say that we look at ourselves every day in the mirror. We generally don't see any particular change in our looks. But if we compare our photograph, which was taken 5 years ago, with the one which is taken today, we will definitely see a lot of changes. In our day-to-day life, we may not notice much change in our appearance, but when we meet our friends after a long time, they can definitely point out to some changes in our looks. Change in our looks is a continuous process which goes on unnoticed. Similarly, the changes in our attitude and behavior do occur with mantra jap, but very slowly. Those become visible over a period of time and are indeed reflected in our day-to-day life. The freedom and liberation in life can be definitely achieved with the constant practice of mantra. Our constant conscious awareness of mantra assures our uninterrupted alignment with the source of life and spontaneous liberation from the most stubborn conditioned habits in due course of time. There is no doubt about it. This is my personal experience and it can be yours too. I like these words of a German psychologist. He writes, "Thoughts of all men are dark with the past memories of guilt and shame. Human conduct has been ever unreliable until anchored in divine." Hence, the secret of freedom lies in the experiential knowledge of the indwelling self. Mantra jap is the means, the most highly recommended austerity for the accomplishment of the desired goal. Mantra jap is the gateway to liberation and freedom in life here and hereafter.